The gunshot still echoed in Ethan Isaacs' ears as he stood at the charred remains of what was once his family home, the acrid smell of smoke and ash clinging to his clothes like a persistent ghost. Montana Territory, 1875. A land of promise and peril where a man could build a dream or watch it burn to the ground in a single night. "It's gone," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the howl of the prairie wind. All of it. 3 days ago, he'd ridden out to Billings to sell cattle, leaving his wife Sarah and 5-year-old son William at their modest ranch. When he returned, he found only blackened timbers and 2 freshly dug graves behind what remained of the barn. The neighboring rancher, old Jim Calloway, had found the bodies after spotting the smoke. Rustlers, Jim had said, who'd taken the remaining cattle and left nothing but destruction in their wake. Ethan fell to his knees, his fingers clutching the scorched earth. At 32, he had already survived the war between the states, had built something from nothing in this unforgiving territory, had found love and created life. Now, it was all ashes. "Mr. Isaacs," the voice belonged to Jim Calloway's son, who approached cautiously. "Pa says you're welcome to stay with us long as you need." Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood, dusted off his knees, and walked toward his horse. Without a word, he mounted and rode away from the smoking remnants of his life. For nearly a year, Ethan drifted through Montana and Wyoming territories like a ghost. He took odd jobs breaking horses, driving cattle, guarding freight, anything that paid in whiskey or enough coins to buy it. He slept under stars and saloon tables, his once strong frame growing leaner, his beard untamed, his eyes hollow reflections of the man he'd once been. In the small settlement of Cottonwood Creek, Wyoming Territory, the autumn of 1876 found Ethan slouched at a corner table in the Frontier Saloon, nursing a bottle of cheap whiskey. His money was running low, but the numbing burn of alcohol was the only thing keeping the nightmares at bay. "You look like you need work more than you need that bottle," a voice said. Ethan looked up to see a tall man with silver-streaked hair and a cattleman's weathered face. "Not interested," Ethan muttered. "Name's Harold Crawford," the man continued, undeterred. "Got a ranch 10 miles east of here. Lost my foreman last month to a widow in Denver. Need a man who knows cattle and can handle men." Ethan snorted. "I'm not your man." Crawford studied him. "You're Ethan Isaacs, aren't you? Heard about what happened up in Montana? Terrible business." Ethan's hand tightened around the glass. "You don't know anything about me. I know you were one of the best cattlemen in the Northern Territory before." Crawford paused. "My daughter runs the books at the ranch. She said she recognized you from a cattle auction in Helena 2 years back." "Your daughter should mind her own affairs," Ethan growled. Crawford placed a folded paper on the table. "Ranch is called Clearwater. Job's yours if you want it. Decent pay, your own cabin. No questions about your past." After Crawford left, Ethan stared at the paper for a long time before stuffing it in his pocket. He ordered another whiskey, but as he raised it to his lips, he caught his reflection in the grimy mirror behind the bar, a stranger's face, haunted and lost. The next morning, with a pounding head and parched mouth, Ethan found himself riding east out of town. He told himself it was because his money had run out, not because of any desire to rejoin the living. Clearwater Ranch spread across a verdant valley, nestled between rolling hills that offered protection from the harsh Wyoming winds. A main house of sturdy timber and stone stood proudly on a gentle rise, flanked by a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. The operation was clearly successful. Fat cattle grazed on lush pastures, healthy horses occupied the corrals, and workers moved with purpose rather than desperation. Crawford met him at the main house, looking pleased but not surprised. "Cabin's behind the barn. Get settled, then meet me in the office. Rebecca will get you squared away with paperwork." Rebecca Crawford was nothing like Ethan expected. At 28, she lacked the fragile delicacy of most ranchers' daughters. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her skin tanned from outdoor work. She wore a simple blouse and riding skirt, and when she looked up from her ledgers, her green eyes assessed him with intelligent scrutiny. "Mr. Isaacs," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "Almost didn't," he admitted, removing his hat. She nodded, unsurprised by his honesty. The pay is $40 a month, with room and board. You'll oversee 15 ranch hands, coordinate with the cook for supplies, manage breeding records, and report directly to my father or me. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I haven't managed men in some time. But you know how, she replied, not a question but a statement of fact. Their eyes met, and Ethan felt something stir within him, not desire, but discomfort at being seen so clearly by a stranger. He looked away first. Your cabin has been prepared, Rebecca continued. We'll expect you for supper at 6 to meet the men. That evening, shaved and wearing the cleanest clothes he possessed, Ethan sat uncomfortably at the long table in the bunkhouse as Crawford introduced him to the ranch hands. They were a mixed lot, grizzled veterans, eager young men, and a few characters of questionable background but evident skill. None asked about his past, though curiosity burned in their eyes. Rebecca sat beside her father, contributing to the conversation with surprising knowledge of cattle breeding and market prices. Occasionally, Ethan caught her watching him, her expression not judgmental, but evaluative, as though she were solving a complex equation. Mr. Isaacs was one of the most respected ranchers in Montana Territory, Crawford announced. We're fortunate to have his expertise. Ethan stared at his plate, discomfort crawling up his spine. The man Crawford described had died in a fire alongside his family. I understand you developed a new approach to winter calving, Rebecca said, drawing his attention. Father mentioned it increased survival rates significantly. The question blindsided Ethan, dredging up memories of happier times. He'd spent 3 winters perfecting that technique, working alongside Sarah, celebrating each successful birth. It was nothing special, he said gruffly. I disagree, Rebecca persisted. Innovation in ranching is what separates success from failure, especially in these territories. I'd appreciate hearing more about it sometime. Ethan excused himself early, retreating to his cabin. It was small but clean, with a sturdy bed, table, chair, and wood stove. Someone had stocked the pantry with basic provisions and left fresh linens on the bed. The thoughtfulness of it all made his chest ache with memories of home. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Ethan rose before dawn, worked from sunup to sundown, and collapsed into exhausted sleep most nights. When insomnia struck, he would sit on his porch, staring at the stars, fighting the urge to find solace in a bottle. Crawford had made it clear that while occasional drinking was acceptable, drunkenness was not tolerated at Clearwater. Despite his determination to remain detached, Ethan found himself gradually re-engaging with life. He offered suggestions for improving the herd, reorganized the breeding program, and trained the younger hands in more efficient techniques. The men came to respect his knowledge and fair treatment, though he maintained a careful distance. Rebecca was a constant presence, managing the business aspects of the ranch with remarkable efficiency. Unlike many women in the territories, she had been educated at a school in Denver and had returned to Clearwater by choice rather than necessity. The ranch hands treated her with respect, bordering on reverence, and even the most hardened cowboys deferred to her judgment in matters of ranch business. One afternoon, as autumn painted the hills in gold and crimson, Ethan was inspecting a section of fence when he heard hoofbeats approaching. Rebecca rode up on a spirited bay mare, her cheeks flushed with the crisp air. Mr. Isaacs, she greeted him, Father asked me to inform you that the cattle buyer from Cheyenne will arrive tomorrow. He'd like you to select 50 head for sale. Ethan nodded. I'll have them ready. Rebecca dismounted, tying her horse to the fence. May I walk with you? I'd like to discuss the breeding program for spring. They walked along the fence line, their conversation strictly professional. Yet Ethan found himself noticing things he hadn't before: the way sunlight caught in her hair, the confidence in her stride, the intelligence behind her questions. You've made significant improvements already, she observed. The men respect you. They're good workers. They were before, she said, but they lacked proper direction. You've given them that. Ethan felt unexpectedly pleased by her assessment. Your father runs a good operation. He does, she agreed, though his health isn't what it was. That's why he needed someone like you. Someone like me? Ethan echoed. Rebecca met his eyes directly. Someone who understands what it means to build something that lasts. The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. He had built something once, something he'd believed would last generations. Its loss still felt like an open wound. "I should get back to work," he said abruptly. Rebecca studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Supper's at the main house tonight. Father insists you join us since the buyer will be there." That evening, Ethan found himself seated in the comfortable dining room of the main house. It was modestly elegant, with furniture brought from the East and touches that spoke of a woman's influence, Rebecca's, he presumed, since Crawford had mentioned his wife passing years earlier. The cattle buyer, a jovial man named Peterson, dominated the conversation with tales of Cheyenne's growth and the increasing demand for beef. Ethan contributed when necessary, providing details about the herd's condition and breeding. After dinner, Crawford invited the men into his study for brandy and cigars. Peterson immediately launched into a discussion about railroad expansion, but Ethan found his attention drawn to a piano melody drifting from the parlor. "Go on," Crawford said, noticing his distraction. "Rebecca would appreciate the company. Peterson and I will be boring each other with business talk for a while yet." In the parlor, Rebecca sat at a handsome upright piano, her fingers moving deftly across the keys. She played without sheet music, her eyes closed, swaying slightly with the melancholy tune. Ethan stood in the doorway, transfixed. It had been so long since he'd heard music played with such feeling. Sarah had played guitar, teaching simple songs to William in the evenings. Rebecca looked up, her fingers stilling. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you come in." "Please don't stop," Ethan said, surprising himself. "It's beautiful." She smiled the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face from handsome to beautiful. "My mother taught me. She insisted music was essential, even on a frontier ranch." "She was right," Ethan said, moving further into the room. "My wife used to play guitar." It was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah to anyone at Clearwater. The words hung in the air between them, acknowledgement of a past he rarely discussed. Rebecca's expression softened. "Would you like to sit?" "I know a few more pieces." Ethan sank into a chair near the piano, and Rebecca began playing again this time, a gentler, sweeter melody that seemed to wrap around him like a comforting embrace. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to remember without the searing pain that usually accompanied memories of his family. When the music ended, they sat in companionable silence. "Thank you," Ethan said finally. Rebecca studied him thoughtfully. "Music helps us remember that beauty still exists, even after loss." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Your father told you." "Some," she acknowledged. "The rest I pieced together. I hope you don't mind." "It doesn't matter," Ethan said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Rebecca stood from the piano bench. "It does matter, Mr. Isaacs. What happened to you and your family was a terrible injustice. That you've survived it shows remarkable strength." "Not strength," Ethan corrected bitterly. "Just inability to die." "I disagree," Rebecca said firmly. "Each day you continue, each moment you choose to remain in this world and contribute something of value, that is strength. Many would have surrendered completely." Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her she understood nothing of his pain, but the sincerity in her eyes stopped him. Instead, he stood and bid her good night, retreating to his cabin and the solitude that had become his only comfort. As autumn surrendered to winter, the work at Clearwater intensified. Cattle needed to be moved to sheltered pastures, hay stores secured, and buildings reinforced against the coming storms. Ethan threw himself into the labor, finding solace in physical exhaustion. The first blizzard hit in early December, a howling fury of wind and snow that confined everyone to their quarters for 3 days. On the fourth morning, Ethan emerged to find drifts taller than a man in some places. He organized the hands to dig out pathways to the barn and livestock areas. Rebecca appeared beside him, dressed in heavy men's clothing, her hair tucked beneath a fur hat. "I've counted our provisions," she reported. "We should be fine for 2 weeks, but if this weather pattern continues, we'll need to arrange a supply run to town." Ethan nodded, trying not to notice how the cold had painted her cheeks with color, or how strands of her hair had escaped to frame her face. "We'll need to check the north pasture. Some cattle might be trapped in that draw by the creek." "I'll come with you," she said decisively. "Father's laid up with his rheumatism again." Ethan wanted to object. The conditions were dangerous, and the temperature brutally low, but the determination in her expression told him argument would be futile. "Dress warmer," he said instead, "and bring extra supplies. If we get caught out there, we'll need them." They rode out an hour later, fighting through drifts and guiding their horses carefully across treacherous terrain. Rebecca proved to be an excellent rider, following Ethan's lead without complaint, despite the biting cold. They found the cattle huddled in a stand of pine trees, protected somewhat from the worst of the wind. "They seem all right," Rebecca called over the wind, surveying the herd, "though that heifer looks close to calving." Ethan followed her gaze to a young cow separated slightly from the others, her sides heaving visibly even at a distance. "Bad timing," he muttered. "She won't make it back to the barn in that condition." Rebecca dismounted, already moving toward her saddlebags. "Then we help her here." "Miss Crawford," Ethan protested, "the temperature's dropping and another storm's brewing. We need to head back." "And leave her to deliver alone? The calf will freeze within minutes." She pulled out a small tarp and rope from her saddlebags. "Help me make a windbreak. You're the winter calving expert, aren't you?" The challenge in her voice stirred something in Ethan, a flicker of the man he'd been before, the rancher who faced challenges rather than fled them. Without further argument, he dismounted and helped her construct a crude shelter using the tarp, ropes, and nearby pine boughs. For the next hour, they worked together to assist the struggling heifer. Ethan guided the delivery with practiced hands while Rebecca supported the cow's head, murmuring soothing words. When the calf finally emerged, sleek and wet in the bitter air, Ethan moved quickly to clear its airways and stimulate breathing. "He's alive!" Rebecca exclaimed as the calf gave a feeble bleat. "Not for long in this cold," Ethan warned, looking at the darkening sky. "We need to dry him off completely and make sure he nurses right away." They worked frantically, using their own scarves and jackets to dry the newborn calf, then guiding him to his mother's teats. The first successful nursing brought a smile to Rebecca's face that pierced through Ethan's carefully maintained defenses. "We did it," she said, her eyes bright with triumph. The moment was shattered by a sudden howl of wind as the next storm front arrived with unexpected ferocity. Visibility dropped to mere feet in seconds. "We can't ride back in this," Ethan shouted over the wind. "We'll have to shelter here." They expanded their makeshift structure, creating enough space for themselves while keeping the cow and calf protected. Huddled together in the small space, they shared the remaining food from their saddlebags and a flask of whiskey Ethan had brought for emergencies. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted further. Despite the windbreak, cold seeped into their bones. Rebecca's teeth chattered uncontrollably. "Come here," Ethan said gruffly, opening his arms. "We need to share warmth or we'll freeze." Rebecca moved into his embrace without hesitation, her body trembling against his. Ethan wrapped his remaining coat around them both, their combined breath creating a small cloud in the frigid air. "Talk to me," Rebecca requested, her voice muffled against his chest. "It helps distract from the cold." "What should I talk about?" "Anything. Tell me about your ranch in Montana." Ethan stiffened, but the darkness and their desperate situation somehow made it easier to speak of things he'd kept buried. "It wasn't much compared to Clearwater. 200 acres, about 60 head of cattle, a small house I built myself, added to it when William was born." Rebecca remained silent, giving him space to continue or stop as he chose. "Sarah loved it there," he found himself saying. "She'd been a schoolteacher in Illinois before we married. Said Montana sunsets were worth all the hardships." "She sounds remarkable," Rebecca said softly. "She was." Ethan swallowed hard. William was like her, curious about everything, always asking questions. He was going to be smarter than his old man. The wind howled around their shelter, punctuating the silence that followed his words. "I'm sorry," Rebecca finally said, "for what was taken from you." Something in her voice, not pity, but genuine sorrow, broke through Ethan's carefully constructed walls. "I should have been there," he whispered. "I could have protected them." "Or died alongside them," Rebecca countered gently. "And then who would remember them? Who would carry their love forward?" Ethan had no answer. They fell silent again, huddled together against the cold and darkness. The newborn calf's occasional bleats the only sound besides the raging storm. At some point during the long night, exhaustion claimed them. Ethan woke at dawn to find Rebecca still nestled against him, her face peaceful in sleep. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Carefully, he extracted himself and checked on the cow and calf, relieved to find both alive and well. Rebecca stirred, blinking up at him in the gray morning light. "We survived," she said simply. "Yes," Ethan replied, helping her to her feet. "We should start back before the weather turns again." The ride to the ranch was silent, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the buildings, they were met by a search party preparing to ride out. "Rebecca! Thank God!" Crawford called, relief evident in his voice as he embraced his daughter. "We're fine, Father," she assured him. "Had to help a heifer calve, then got caught by the storm." Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his cabin, staring at the fire in his small stove. The events of the previous day had awakened feelings he'd thought long dead: concern for another person's welfare, pride in a job well done, even a fleeting moment of contentment as Rebecca slept trustingly in his arms. A knock at his door roused him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Rebecca standing there, a covered dish in her hands. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. "Cook made stew." Ethan stepped back to let her enter, suddenly conscious of his humble quarters. Rebecca set the dish on his table, then turned to face him. "Thank you for yesterday," she said. "For keeping us both alive." "You did as much as I did," Ethan replied honestly. Rebecca smiled slightly. "Perhaps, but I also wanted to thank you for sharing your memories. I know it wasn't easy." Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It was just talk to pass the time." "It was more than that," Rebecca said quietly. "It was trust." Their eyes met, and Ethan felt something shift between them, a connection formed through shared danger and vulnerability. "I should go," Rebecca said after a moment. "Father will be wondering where I am." As she reached the door, Ethan found himself speaking. "Rebecca." She turned, and he continued awkwardly. "Thank you. For the stew, and for listening." Her smile warmed him more than the fire. "Good night, Ethan." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it in her voice followed him into his dreams. Winter settled fully over Clearwater Ranch, transforming the landscape into a crystalline world of white and blue. The work continued, feeding cattle, breaking ice on water troughs, repairing damage from storms. But the pace slowed as nature enforced its own rhythm on the land. Ethan found himself invited to the main house regularly, sometimes for business discussions with Crawford, other times for meals or evening gatherings when isolation threatened to overwhelm the ranch's inhabitants. During these visits, he and Rebecca developed a cautious friendship, discussing books she'd read, ranching techniques he'd developed, or simply sharing observations about the day's events. On Christmas Eve, Crawford insisted that all the ranch hands join them at the main house for a proper celebration. The cook outdid himself with a feast of venison, potatoes, and pies. Someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu dancing broke out in the cleared dining room. Ethan stood apart, watching. It was his first Christmas since the tragedy, and memories threatened to overwhelm him. William's excitement on Christmas mornings, Sarah's careful preparation of special foods, the simple gifts they'd exchange in their cozy home. "Penny for your thoughts," Rebecca said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of eggnog. "Not worth that much," Ethan replied, accepting the cup. Rebecca studied him. "It's all right to remember them today. It's all right to miss them." Ethan looked at her, surprised by her perception. "Does it show so plainly?" "Only to someone who's watching," she said softly. Their eyes held, and Ethan felt a now familiar tug in his chest, an unwelcome attraction he'd been fighting for weeks. Rebecca deserved better than a broken man with nothing to offer. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" she asked. "It's gotten rather warm in here." They stood on the porch, their breath-forming clouds in the cold night air. Stars blazed overhead in the clear sky, and silence enveloped them like a blanket. "I used to love Christmas," Ethan said suddenly. "Now I just want it to pass." Rebecca nodded. "The first Christmas after Mother died, Father and I rode out and camped in the hills. Couldn't bear to be in the house with all its memories. The second year was easier, By the third, we could celebrate again, remembering her with joy instead of only pain. Does it ever stop hurting? Ethan asked, the question escaping before he could contain it. No, Rebecca answered truthfully, but it changes, becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it. They stood in silence again, shoulders not quite touching. I've seen you changing these past months, Rebecca said finally, coming back to life. Ethan wanted to deny it, but honesty compelled him to acknowledge the truth in her words. If I have, it's because of this place, because of your father's trust. He paused. Because of you. Rebecca turned to face him, her expression solemn in the moonlight. Me? You see me, Ethan said simply. Not just what I've lost, but what remains. What might still be possible. Rebecca's hand found his, warm despite the cold night. There is so much still possible for you, Ethan. The touch of her hand, the gentleness in her voice, the understanding in her eyes, it was too much and not enough all at once. Ethan stepped back, breaking their connection. You should return inside, he said. Your father will be looking for you. Hurt flashed across her face before she composed herself. Of course. Good night, Mr. Isaacs. The formality stung, but Ethan knew it was for the best. Rebecca Crawford deserved a whole man, not the fragments that remained of Ethan Isaacs. Winter gradually loosened its grip on the land as January gave way to February. Ethan threw himself into work, avoiding the main house when possible and keeping interactions with Rebecca strictly professional when they couldn't be avoided. If she was hurt by his withdrawal, she didn't show it, maintaining her usual competence and composure. In early March, Crawford called Ethan to his office. The older man looked tired, the winter having taken a toll on his already fragile health. Sit down, Isaacs, he said, gesturing to a chair. I need to discuss something important with you. Ethan complied, noting with concern the pallor of Crawford's complexion. Doctor was here yesterday, Crawford began without preamble. Says my heart's not what it should be. Wants me to consider selling the ranch and moving to a milder climate. Ethan felt a pang of genuine dismay. Despite his determination to remain emotionally detached, he'd come to respect Crawford deeply. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. Haven't told Rebecca yet, Crawford continued. She loves this place more than I do, if that's possible. Would break her heart to leave it. She's strong, Ethan offered. If it's a matter of your health, Crawford waved dismissively. I've been thinking on it all night, got a different solution in mind. He fixed Ethan with an intense gaze. I want to make you a partner in Clearwater. Ethan stared at him, certain he'd misheard. Sir? You've transformed this operation in less than a year, Crawford said. Profits are up, the herd's healthier, the men respect you. I need someone who can take over the physical aspects of running this place while I step back. There must be someone better suited, Ethan protested. Someone who hasn't lost everything, Crawford interrupted. That's precisely why you're the right choice. You understand the value of what we've built here. You won't take it for granted. Ethan shook his head. I can't accept. Is it the money? I'm not giving it away, Isaacs. You'd buy in over time from your share of profits. It's not the money, Ethan said. I'm not the right man. Crawford studied him for a long moment. Is this about Rebecca? The question caught Ethan off guard. I don't know what you mean. I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching, Crawford said bluntly. And I've seen how she looks at you. Ethan stood abruptly. Then you understand why I can't accept your offer. I have nothing to give her, nothing to offer any woman. That's not for you to decide, Crawford replied calmly. Rebecca knows her own mind, always has. She deserves better, Ethan insisted. Crawford sighed heavily. My daughter deserves a man who respects her intelligence, values her strength, and loves her completely. I believe you could be that man, if you'd stop punishing yourself for surviving. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He stood frozen, unable to respond. Think about my offer, Crawford said more gently. Both parts of it? I don't expect an immediate answer. Ethan fled the office, his thoughts in turmoil. He saddled his horse and rode out to the far pastures, needing distance and clarity. The land was awakening from winter's grip, patches of green emerging from melting snow, birds returning to nest, cattle growing frisky in the warming air. As he crested a hill overlooking the valley, Ethan reined in his horse and sat motionless, taking in the panoramic view of Clearwater Ranch spread below him. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future here, not just as an employee, but as someone with a stake in the land, with roots and purpose. And Rebecca, the thought of her stirred emotions he'd buried alongside Sarah and William. Was it possible to love again without dishonoring their memory? Could he rebuild a life from the ashes of his past? The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Rebecca riding toward him, her hair coming loose from its braid in the spring breeze. "Father told me I might find you out here," she said, bringing her horse alongside his. "He also told me what he proposed." Ethan looked away. "I haven't given him an answer yet." "I know." Rebecca dismounted, leading her horse to a patch of emerging grass. After a moment, Ethan followed suit. They stood side by side, looking out over the ranch. "When I was 16, Rebecca began, a wealthy cattle buyer from Denver asked for my hand. He was 43, recently widowed, with grown children and a mansion in the city. Father left the decision entirely to me." Ethan glanced at her, curious where this story led. "Everyone thought I was mad to refuse," she continued. "A life of luxury instead of the hardships of a ranch. But I knew what I wanted, even then. I wanted Clearwater. I wanted to build something lasting, something meaningful." She turned to face him. "I still do." "Rebecca, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I've watched you these past months, Ethan. I've seen your grief, but I've also seen your strength, your integrity, your capacity for caring, despite everything you've lost." She took a deep breath. "I find myself hoping you might consider a future that includes me, not just Clearwater." Ethan stared at her, overwhelmed by her directness and the vulnerability beneath her confident words. "I'm not the man I was before," he said honestly. "Some parts of me died with Sarah and William. I don't know if what remains is enough for anyone." "It's enough for me," Rebecca said simply. "More than enough." She stepped closer, her green eyes holding his without wavering. "I'm not asking you to forget them. I would never want that. They're part of who you are, part of what makes you the man standing before me now." Ethan felt something breaking loose inside him, not the shattering he'd feared, but a releasing, like ice melting in spring thaw. "I don't know if I can be what you deserve." "I'm not asking for promises," Rebecca said. "Only possibility. Only a chance for both of us to discover what might grow between us." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, Ethan raised his hand to touch her cheek. Her skin was warm against his fingers, alive with possibility. "A chance," he echoed, his voice rough with emotion. Rebecca smiled, covering his hand with her own. "That's all anyone can ask." With the gentleness of a man rediscovering his capacity for tenderness, Ethan leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, but filled with promise, not a culmination, but a beginning. As spring bloomed across Clearwater Ranch, so too did the tentative relationship between Ethan and Rebecca. They moved carefully, respectful of both his healing grief and the watchful eyes of the ranch community. Crawford observed their growing closeness with quiet satisfaction, but made no comment beyond practical discussions about Ethan's gradual transition to partnership in the ranch. By summer's height, Ethan had fully accepted Crawford's business proposal, signing papers that made him a 10% owner of Clearwater with provisions to increase his share over time. More importantly, he had begun to accept that loving Rebecca didn't diminish what he'd shared with Sarah, that building a new life didn't betray the one that had been destroyed. On a warm evening in early September, Ethan and Rebecca rode to the highest point on Clearwater land, a rocky outcrop that offered views all the way to the distant mountains. They dismounted and spread a blanket on the grass for a simple picnic as the sun began its descent. "I received a letter from the territorial marshal today," Ethan said as they sat side by side, watching the play of light across the valley. Rebecca turned to him, instantly alert. "About the men who attacked your ranch?" Ethan nodded. "They caught them in Idaho. 3 men wanted for similar attacks across Montana and Wyoming. They'll stand trial in Helena next month." Rebecca took his hand. "Will you go?" "Yes," Ethan said after a moment. "I need to see their faces. Need to hear them answer for what they did. He squeezed her hand. Will you come with me? Of course, Rebecca replied without hesitation. You don't have to face this alone. Ethan looked at her, this remarkable woman who had helped him find his way back to life. I've been thinking about what happens after, he said. After the trial? What do you mean? I want to visit their graves, Ethan said quietly. Sarah and William, I left so quickly. Never said a proper goodbye. He took a deep breath. And I want you with me, if you're willing. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I would be honored. Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band set with a small emerald. It was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found someone extraordinary. Rebecca's breath caught as she looked from the ring to Ethan's face. I never expected to love again, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. Never thought I'd find a reason to try building a life once more. But you, Rebecca Crawford, have given me that reason. He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm asking if you'll take a chance on me, not just for now, but for all the days to come. Will you marry me? Rebecca's smile was radiant through her tears. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Ethan Isaacs, I will marry you. As the sun gilded the hills of Clearwater Ranch in golden light, Ethan slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger, then drew her close for a kiss that held both gratitude for the past and promise for the future. 2 years later, Ethan stood on the porch of the new house he'd built on Clearwater land, watching as Rebecca rocked their infant daughter in the swing beside him. Inside, Crawford was entertaining their 1-year-old son with exaggerated stories of his younger days. The old man's health stabilized by reduced responsibilities and the joy of grandchildren. Sarah would have liked you, Ethan said quietly to his wife. She always said the measure of a person was in how they treated others during difficult times. Rebecca smiled up at him, reaching for his hand. I wish I could have known her. And William? They're part of us, Ethan said, the words no longer bringing pain, but a gentle melancholy tinged with gratitude. In how we live, in what we teach our children, in the love we've built here. As twilight descended over Clearwater Ranch, Ethan Isaacs looked out at the land that had given him a second chance at life. The loss would always be with him, a shadow on his heart, but no longer did it define him. Instead, he had found the courage to build anew, not replacing what was lost, but honoring it through creating something equally precious. In the arms of the woman who had become his reason to try again, surrounded by the family they were building together, Ethan had discovered that a heart, like the wild western land itself, possessed remarkable resilience. It could be scarred by fire, battered by storms, and yet still nurture new life when tended with patience and love.